hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning back in to Pop Culture Coram Deo. We're, 7 or 8 episodes into this thing now, and we appreciate every one of your downloads and every time you hit play. Thankful, too, for those reviews that are starting to show up on iTunes. Those things are super important, hard to come by, and we appreciate everyone who took a moment to do that for us. Since we talked to you last, we've done a few tweaks, one of those being that we are now on Instagram, and so you can find us on Instagram at the familiar PCCD pod, and we would really appreciate connecting with you on there. So if you're on Instagram, give us a follow. Unless you're posting crazy stuff, we'll give you a follow back, and that'll be another way that we can connect as the host of this thing with you guys who are listening, who we are very thankful for. So as usual, I am back with Jared Moore. Jared, how you doing, man?
Doing well, man. It's kind of a dreary day outside, and we're expecting some snow. So I assume Walmart and every dollar store within Cumberland County, man, is out of bread and milk.
Yeah, the winter's just the worst. I mean, I love the South. I'm very thankful to be a product of the South. I don't despise that upbringing and living there today, but winter here is just terrible because the best you can hope for is some gray, rainy day. You know, drabness is the ceiling, and at the bottom you're going to get everything you just talked about. Jared, I know we didn't talk about doing this before the episode, so I'm gonna catch you cold, and if you got nothing, we'll just edit it out. But we're a couple episodes in, man. What are your thoughts on the journey so far with Pop Culture Coram Deo?
I enjoy it, man. I enjoy interacting with pop culture and having to think through applying a Christian worldview to pop culture. Because now when I watch a movie, I don't watch it in the same way anymore, and I think that is helpful, and it's still enjoyable. I know, some Christians may think that, well, if I'm analyzing a movie, I can enjoy it. I think it enhances it. It actually, you can actually see God's fingerprints, and I love it when. This is going to sound odd, but I love it when atheists put out a movie that screams and points me to God in worship, because though they deny him with their lips, they cannot deny, one, that they live in his world. There aren't any other worlds. There's only God's world. Two, they can't deny that they're made in his image, and they reveal his fingerprints in their various creations, their various stories. I mean, I love those facts, and I love being able to look at someone who is denying God with their lips, but yet encouraging me to worship him through the content they produce.
Yeah, I'm with you on the idea that kind of chopping these things up and looking at them for fingerprints of God's glory certainly enhances the experience and gives you a lot to praise the Lord for. I mean, we've been over that territory, I guess, a little bit, but God's image just pushes through when his image bearers create art, and it's a fun way to experience his goodness. I'm also enjoying connecting with the people who've reached back out to us. We've talked about Mike Dickerson on here already, a friend of ours named Brad Walker, just starting to have more and more conversations about the work we're doing here. That's super encouraging, and I'm thankful for the way people are engaging with what we're putting out here. I also want to say a word of thanks to our listeners on this episode. Jared and I had pretty strong ideas about what we wanted to get done when we launched this podcast, but we've found through some of the feedback and just the experience of recording that we're still kind of playing ourselves into game shape, and we are still working out some kinks. And so we appreciate you hanging with us during these early episodes as we iron out our methodology and how we're going to do stuff going into the future that we hope Pop Culture Coram Deo has in your podcast player and in other venues. So thanks again for doing that. And Jared, I want to say thanks to you, man. We got a really intriguing movie to talk about this week. I was on the edge of my seat for most of that movie while we were watching it, and this is something you found and brought to me. I didn't have a lot of input other than saying, yeah, that looks good, and I'm really thankful you put Hostiles in front of us.
Man, honestly, I was surprised at how good it was. I mean, I was expecting it to be good because of the actors that were in it, but I mean, it kind of, when they give you a synopsis and they show you previews, they don't show you a whole lot. I grew up watching some westerns, but as I've tried to return to some of those westerns, I've actually felt kind of. I mean, when I go back and watch them now, they're kind of slow to me.
Oh yeah.
And this wasn't slow at all. And I mean, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But one of the things, as far as creation wise, man, it was the scenery. I was pretty amazed at how they used the scenery to kind of keep you engaged in the movie.
Absolutely. I've got some thoughts on that too. I don't think you can talk about this movie without talking about the use of scenery. You brought up Western as a genre. That's something I wanted to ask you about. I can't remember if we have talked about it on here, but that is a genre that is near and dear to my my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Tombstone is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I think my affection for the genre is rooted in the fact that it was the kind of movie that my dad was most likely to watch with me, and so I was always looking out for another John Wayne or James Garner movie to put on and watch with my dad, who just didn't have a lot of recreation time, and so I think that's carried over into my adult years, where I still really get excited for a new Western that's well put together, and I watch a disproportionate amount of them. I probably horror is my first love and what I watch the most by weight, but proportionately I watch about every Western movie I can get my hands on, so I'm excited to get into another good one.
Yeah, me too, man. And I something about Westerns is, I don't know about the genre, is that the bad guys almost always treat women inappropriately, and the good guys, though they are rough and tough and will knock your teeth out, women, it's the exact opposite. It's like they turn into slobbering babies around women. It's just an interesting dynamic.
Are you saying you don't turn into slobbering baby around women?
Well, around 3 women.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Oh, come on, man. We don't need to talk about that.
I think we need to talk about you. We can leave me off the table.
We need to talk about you. You do not want to. Jeff and I have known each other for a long time, and we could tell y'all some stories, but we're not going to, because we want to remain friends on this show.
Yeah, all those stories would highlight my just unexplainably robust Christian maturity and exemplary character, and just really enhance your respect for a guy like me, right, Jared? That's the kind of stories you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking in the past, years and years ago, when we were immature Christians and dummies, and the Lord has matured us quite a bit, and some godly women have tamed us, I believe.
Certainly been major vehicles of God's grace to me, starting with my mom, certainly my wife, and even just good women in the church. So with that in mind, you ready to pull the curtain and jump into the world of hostile?
Yes, sir. If our listeners are still with us.
Jared, I'm going to throw a summary at you. You tell me what I got right and what I got wrong, okay?
Sure.
Broad strokes on this movie. This film takes place specifically in 1892, but more generally in the era of the closing of the Wild West, where the West was being tamed as a frontier, or, you may say that as the ending of the era where Western lands were being wrested away from the Native Americans who originally inhabited. So we're at the end of an era here. And the central plot concerns longtime Indian hunter Captain John Blocker, who has been tasked by his commanding officers to escort a hated enemy back to that enemy's home territory, where that enemy is going to die among his people. And as they're going along the way, the company that Blocker is leading suffers greatly, both from internal and external pains. What a miss there.
I think that you pretty much summarized it well. I think that's good, man.
So guys, that's your point of stop if you want to go see this movie before listening to the rest of the podcast. We try to do a summary there that wasn't chock full of spoilers to let you know if, hey, I want to listen on, then decide if I want to go watch the movie. That's fine. But if you're going to watch the movie first, go ahead and press pause right now. Go watch the movie and come back to us when you're done. Everything else from here on out, fair warning for spoilers. Okay? So pressing on there, Jared, you want to get into a conscience warning?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As far as conscience issues in this, there's intense violent scenes, and we mean intense violence towards children, even violence towards a baby, though the baby is never seen.
Mm-hmm.
And just heart wrenching,
stomach turning.
Stomach turning. I mean, I don't know. It probably got a little dusty in the theater. I didn't look over at you, dude. Were you weeping a little bit in that movie, or?
Man, this one plays with the heartstrings. And truth be told, for all my false bravado earlier, I'm quick to choke up anyway. And this movie gave me a lot of opportunity to do just that.
Oh yeah, dude, it was it might. I didn't look over. We had another pastor friend with us, and I didn't look at him either. I just kept looking at the movie. But so it is that. To make at least two grown men who think that they're fairly manly to cry some, or at least tears come to your eyes. It is a heart wrenching scene. So you need to be aware of that going into this movie, that there's several scenes like that.
Well, and you jump in from the go, man. I mean, the opening sequence that starts this movie is I don't feel myself someone who's particularly given to being affected by violence, but dude, I was ready to claw my way out of the theater just by the time the name of the movie came up, 5 minutes in. So you got to get ready to jump into the deep end, and the water is cold.
Yeah, I'll say this, man. I've seen it, and the first 10 minutes of this movie are worse as far as horror, in my opinion, than it.
Absolutely. And it's made much worse because this looks realistic. I mean, this is a fictional story, but things like this happened, and you just can't get away from it when it's set in front of you on a massive screen.
And my kids and your kids too, are about the same age as these children who are facing violence in this movie.
Yeah, so we're chopping up some plot here, and that's my fault. Just to reemphasize what Jared said, and to bring us back to his conscience warning section, if violence is a problem for you, you're either going to have to psych yourself up really well for this, or you're going to have to say, for whatever good may be in this movie, I'm going to read the Wikipedia summary, I'm going to read the plugged-in review, and I'm not going to watch the thing.
And as far as language, there's no vulgar language that I remember, but there's crude language. As far as sexuality, there's not any that I'm aware of.
Well, there's none portrayed on screen, graphically. In fact, there's a time where it looks like that's going to happen, and in a very positive turn of events, it doesn't. But I'm going to say that looking over sort of the big picture of the narrative here, there is suicide in this movie, there is rape in this movie, there is lynching in this movie, and there is public execution in this movie. And they're not all presented on screen, but they're strongly implied. And you do see some of the physical consequences. Like you see some women who've been roughed up and their lips are busted and whatnot. With the lynching and the execution, you see that. You see a guy swinging from a tree on a rope, and you see dead bodies where people have been in struggles and killed. So, there's plenty of violence in this that's laid out for you, but there's also violence that's strongly implied. And it's probably it's just the sort of thing we want to let our listeners know about in advance going into this movie.
If you want to even more detailed analysis, I'm sure you can check out the plugged-in review as far as conscience issues.
Yeah, and, I think they're a secular source, but Common Sense Media does a pretty good job of highlighting some of these things too. All right, man. Well, before we get into the actual analysis of the movie, I just wanted to throw some film notes at you. Did you see 2009's Crazy Heart had Jeff Bridges in it?
Dude, I didn't. I know it's awful.
I can't remember what conscience issues are in that movie. I'm sure there are, but I really enjoyed that movie. It's about a country music singer who's down on his luck, but he finds love with a single mom, kind of love in an unexpected place. Jeff Bridges won an Oscar for that. T-Bone Burnett won an Oscar for the music in that. Maggie Gyllenhaal's in it along with Jeff Bridges, also Colin Farrell. I told you I'm a sucker for Westerns, and this is sort of a modern Western. But when I saw that Scott Cooper made Hostiles and I connected it back to Crazy Heart, I thought, oh yeah, this guy's really good at making movies, and particularly, movies about guys wearing boots. So I just thought I'd check and see if you'd seen it. The other thing that you and I noticed is that the distributor for this film, I think, explains why it wasn't initially a wide release movie. So it got into several theaters in December of this year, but only got a wide release in January. And that's because the distributor here has basically been doing TV since the early 90s and only recently got into distributing film. So the stuff that I saw they had done thus far, there's a shark movie, which, by the way, man, talk about actually scaring me to death, the idea of being in water with sharks. There's a shark movie called 47 Meters Down. There's a new horror movie that I'm getting ready to watch. I've got a copy of it. I just haven't watched it yet, called Friend Request. And then a movie that was on the trailers before Hostiles called Chappaquiddick, about Ted Kennedy and the way they handled the damage to his political aspirations when he basically, I think, under the influence of alcohol, drove a car off a bridge, and a female that was with him, a woman who was his companion there, drowned. Looks really interesting. That's also coming out of the same production company.
Okay. I think 47 Meters Down got a lot of positive reviews, but I might be wrong.
I'm going to watch it at some point because my wife wants to.
Really?
Yeah, I'm for real. Like scary murder clowns in the sewer doesn't bother me at all. Sharks, picturing sharks swimming underneath me when I'm out in the ocean, which is one of my favorite environments to be in, that terrifies me to death. So I'm going to watch it, but I'm going to do it with a sick stomach, I'm sure.
Hey, dude, you need to do like one of those cool preaching things that pastors do. Like if you get 200 people here, I'll get in a shark infested waters or something.
There's no amount of visitors to my church that would compel me to do that.
Dude, I will bring my whole church down there, and I'm sure we could get other pastors too. We could probably get 1,000 people there if you'll get in water with sharks.
The only way a visitor to my church could make that happen is if that visitor was Jesus in, person showing up saying, "Thou shalt do this, Jeff." Short of that, it ain't happening, man.
Can I not speak into your life a little bit, buddy?
Not about sharks. All right, so those are just movie notes. They don't really affect the experience of watching the movie as a Christian, but I thought they were interesting. I also wanted to bring up Crazy Heart to see if you had any thoughts on it. So here's where we're going to dig in more specifically into the movie, guys, and I want to be clear on some of our methodology. Now, we're hoping to release an episode that's just about our methodology, because one of the things we're hoping to do is help people do what we do every time they sit down to watch a movie. So we want to be real clear about our method so that people pick it up and make use of it in a way that profits them. So what we're going to do here initially is talk about the big picture issues of this movie. So if you can think of this movie or any movie you're watching as a field that you have purchased, and you're suspicious that beneath the surface of that field, there may be really rich resources. You're looking for, veins of gold and minerals and diamonds, and you want to get in there and see what's under the surface. Well, when we go through the section of our podcast where we're talking about creation and fall and redemption and glorification, I want you to think of those things as the shovel with which you break the soil and start surfacing the elements of this movie that are worth contemplating as a Christian. So what we're going to do is go through and ask questions about what this movie says about creation and fall and redemption and glorification as a way to sort of surface whatever's in the movie. And then later we'll come back to some questions by a guy named Ted Turnow to help us sort those into helpful categories. So we're doing some excavation right now. Here in just a minute, we'll be doing some sorting. And after we're done with all that, we'll come to a conclusion. And the reason we start with those categories of creation, fall, redemption, and glorification is because those are the categories of God's story. We are in the story as human beings. We are in the story that God is telling about his son, Jesus Christ, through cosmic history. And as a storyteller, our God has given us an act of creation. He's also given us an act whereby man in rebellion has fallen. He's given us an act whereby he enters into the story and redeems those who believe in him. And he is soon going to give us an act where he recreates all things in light of who his son is and what his son has done. And so when we're looking at these little stories in these movies, we're comparing them against the great cosmic story to see where they tell the truth about the real story, the story that God is telling about Jesus, and finding, because these are stories told by sinners, that they are also going to tell us some lies. And we want to pick out the good and throw away the lies. And so that's what we're working through here in this first step. So Jared, anything you want to add to that little monologue of mine there explaining what we're doing here?
Probably the only thing is as far as the illustration, it's kind of like it's kind of like the difference between a logger cutting down a forest or cutting down trees in a forest versus a surgeon with a scalpel. The first part we're kind of like a logger cutting down trees, big picture stuff, and then the second part we're trying to be like a surgeon with a scalpel, getting to specifics.
Okay, well, thank you for that detail. So let's jump in here. Let's talk about the creation motif in the movie Hostiles. So if you'll allow me, I'll give you my thoughts up front. You can interact with them as you see fit. So I think when we're talking about analyzing creation in this movie, we're talking about seeing what is built into the fabric of this world that's good. And we're doing that because God created his creation and he spoke over it and said it is good. And so there's a lot in Hostiles that corresponds to that. Creation itself, as we've just talked about, is front and center in this movie over and over. You see these constant wide-angle shots of beautiful wilderness scenes. And I think this movie is very clearly and self-consciously set in the real world. There's no magic. There's no mystical elements here. This is as real as dust on your boots when you've been riding all day. And I think this movie shows us a lot of goodness. So just generally, let you elaborate as much as you want. This movie shows us human goodness in acts of mercy towards one's enemies. It shows us goodness in the richness of family and friendship. Male and female relationships here are treated with dignity by the honorable character characters, and then they're treated with dishonor by the wicked characters, but both of those things work out to give us the right moral compass when it comes to male-female relationships. And then the film tells us that evil exists. It really does exist. It's not something that can be explained away. It's going to be found inside of us, but it's also going to be found outside of us. And whichever arena it shows itself, it should be fought back against. So that's what I'm reading when I'm looking at what does this world say about the world and what's baked into it in terms of goodness. What else are you seeing there, Jared?
I think you hit the nail on the head, man. I think, most of the movies that we interact with don't get evil right. I mean, if they get evil right, it's always outside of the heroes. In this movie, it's found inside of everyone. And I think, for that reason, this movie and many others, this movie leans it's in a Christian world, right? I mean, it's a very Christian world that is portrayed by Cooper.
Sure. So I took the lion's share then on creation. Why don't you talk to us about fallenness in the world of hostiles?
As far as fallenness in the world of hostiles, you see it in the soldiers following orders. You know the story concerning Europeans coming over, taking Indian lands. I mean, that is emphasized here in this time. But there's also on both sides of among the Indians and also among the Americans, there is evil groups and good groups. And so concerning all, there's evil present in both groups. And I think the author kind of wants us to identify with both Yellowhawk and Captain Blocker, but it's probably especially Blocker. But the author wants us to see the evil that's in our own hearts, the prejudice, and it intentionally wants to humanize the Indians. It's interesting how it starts, right? How the movie starts. I mean, Cooper wants you to hate the Indians, right? You don't even know at the beginning of the movie that the tribe of Indians that attacks the people at the beginning are Apache, and the Yellowhawk and his family are Cheyenne. And so they're actually the Cheyenne are the good Indians, if you will, or the moral Indians, and the Apache are the immoral Indians. And that is, and so you don't know that first. So by the time I see Yellowhawk, I mean, I'm thinking that he's like the Apache.
Well,
right? I'm thinking
Miss Quaid does that the first time she lays eyes on him too, right? I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead into the specifics, but you're with her. The first time she sees Yellowhawk, she freaks out because she thinks it's just another member of the group that just ravaged her family.
Right. And so there, as far as the fall, we see that there is a prejudice towards others, towards other races in particular, and instead, this movie says that we should gather around morality, like as far as what unites us or what should unite us is a belief in what is good and what is beneficial for others. And I enjoyed how the movie emphasized gathering around morality as opposed to gathering around race or gender or other things that folks often unite around. In this movie, it seems that we need to unite around core beliefs, if you will.
Yeah. I'm certainly with you, and I'm gonna put a pin there for just a second and try to stop you because I want to talk about that more fully here in the next category. One of the things that I would just add to all the good things Jared just said is that in this movie, men wound and kill their fellow men. War is a demon that consumes good men. Selfishness leads to the loss of innocent life. And I also think this movie implies pretty strongly some stuff about war as a thing. So, the opening interactions with Blocker and his commanding officer and a newsman, I think, who's in the room with them, tells us that both war and politics in a fallen world are corrupting mechanisms, and they sear the conscience of the people who participate in them. And that's pretty pessimistic, but it's also pretty realistic, at least where I'm sitting here today in 2018.
That's a good point. Because there was no middle ground between those two guys at all. I mean, they were ready to. I mean, if the commanding officer hadn't been in the room, Blocker might have killed that guy.
Yeah, the newspaper man. I thought there was such a powerful scene there. I want to try to restrain myself as much, but basically, Blocker is recounting all the atrocities that he has seen Yellowhawk perpetrate perpetuate. And he's giving specific names to men who suffered violence at Yellow Hawk's hands. And that scummy newspaper man starts to laugh. And you can just see that if Blocker was out in the streets, he would tear his head off. And he says, don't you dare laugh. And like the venom and the restraint and like just on the cusp of exploding in violence, Bale delivers every bit of that perfectly, man. And I felt it too. I thought, man, you worm, how dare you laugh these things?
Oh yeah, man. And just a note about that, Bale needs to win something for this. Oh, Rosamund Pike. Yeah, she did amazing too. I mean, the performances in this movie, really all around, were amazing.
Absolutely. And let's talk about what redemption looks like here in this movie. You've kind of brought us into that, this idea that we gather around virtue. So I'm gonna say that redemption in hostiles is something that can be found, and it can be found at least in part in finding empathy, leading to forgiveness of one's enemies. But also, this movie highlights the goodness of persevering in faith during suffering. And I think the strongest element that's positive here, that's redemptive, that it highlights is this idea of giving yourself in self-sacrifice to benefit other people. And I think this movie tells us that it's doing that giving of yourself to benefit someone else is the way that the way that healthy community is created, and also is the way that we enter into a fuller expression and experience of our own humanity. I'll ask you about the theme later, but I think this movie has a lot to say about the experience of being human. And I think part of what it says about becoming more human is giving yourself sacrificially. Take it from there, man. What else you see there?
One other note about redemption. Redemption in this movie is in keeping the faith, but it's in keeping your particular faith. So Yellow Hawk in remaining faithful to his God, and the white man, so to speak, remaining faithful to their God. And the movie, in my opinion, hints at a pluralism, that basically we all worship the same God, kind of like there's a wagon wheel, God's in the middle, and it doesn't matter which spoke you go up through whatever religion you're a part of. And so the redemption in keeping the faith in this movie is partly in keeping the faith in your particular religion and still being able to gather around the common morals that are associated with those religions, still uniting with people of other religions.
Yeah, it's a super important qualification. I'm glad you made that. Lastly, I felt like we didn't get to live in the better world that comes very long, but we do get a little glimpse of it right there at the end, where you're on the train platform getting ready for the train to Chicago, right? So what would you say this movie says, the better world that'll be built if you give yourself basically virtue and morality? What do you think that better world looks like?
It looks like a unity that gathers around other things than race and selfishness.
Prejudice and stereotyping.
Yeah, and so selflessness. And so it's interesting that Christian Bale is now going to be the father of a Cheyenne Indian when he has killed countless Cheyenne Indians.
Yeah, he literally takes a step towards that lie. And you're right. There's a beautiful irony there, like a redemptive irony. I think I would say that this movie says basically the better world is going to be found in small communities that are built on the kind of virtues we've been talking about already. Small communities like groups of friends, but also then nuclear families that may be composed of people from different walks of life, even through the adoption process, but nonetheless are reflective of God's design for the family. So, okay, man.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to add there? We want to move into the questions from Turnout.
I think we're ready to move into get the scalpels out.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to tell you, Jared. I think the overall theme of this movie is the way that violence and hatred dehumanize us, in the way that compassion and self-sacrifice humanize us. Okay, that's my major theme here. Would you agree, disagree, or modify?
I would agree, and almost add a Christian spin to it. So so self-sacrifice shows forth God's image more, and selfishness and sin basically de-images us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it mars the image of God.
Saying, but go ahead.
I didn't mean to speak over you there, but what you're saying is it mars the image of God yet further in us. We're still created in the image of God. We still bear that image, but the fall has marred the image. In giving yourself to these wicked things, that image is increasingly marred. Am I understanding you right there?
Yes, it is. It's increasingly marred to the point of being unrecognizable. Sin sin does not show forth God's image; it veils it. Or if we're talking about image in action, where we are displaying God's image, sin veils it. Sin hides it. And if you run down that road into depravity, I think it can lead to what Romans 1 talks about. Eventually to a reprobate mind.
Yeah. So then we would understand that the people in hell are the most inhuman creatures in existence.
Yes.
That sin has fully worked within them. They're now only related to God in His wrath, and they have forfeited the dignity of bearing His image through their wicked choices. Yeah. Okay. Well, so Turnow gives us 5 questions. The first question he gives us is, what is the story? And he admonishes us to get it right. And so earlier in the episode, we tried to do that by giving you a pretty good summary of the movie without giving away major plot points. The second question Turnow gives us is, where am I? And asks us to see the style and shape of the imaginary world. So we accomplished that through that earlier walk through the categories of creation, fall, redemption, and glorification. So now we're into some of the questions Jared called scalpel questions. And the third one starts us there, asking us about what's good here. The fourth one asks us to also consider what's evil. And Jared, if you're willing to do this with me, I much more want to talk about and spend our time talking about what's good in this movie. So if you'll let me, I'm going to flip those questions. I don't think they're in any, necessary order. You can talk about what's evil just as effectively as you can what's good first. So if you're willing, can we talk about what's evil here in this movie first?
Sure.
Okay, so I had a real hard time. I'm a fan of this movie. I really like this movie. I think I like this movie as a Christian. I had a hard time finding that much that was, according to Turnow's own words, distorted, evil, and false. And Turnow also, after asking that question, wants us to then follow up and say, how do I subvert the idolatry that this movie tempts me to by telling me lies? So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk about the way that this movie pushes us towards, sort of a squishy pluralism in the religious arena after that, and then anything else you see after that. But first, I'm going to say that I think this movie overemphasizes that compassion and empathy is a comprehensive solution to human wickedness and the alienation it brings, both from our Creator and our fellow man. Like, this movie gets it right that compassion, empathy, self-sacrifice are good things that cultivate yet more good things. But in telling us that that's the only resource we have, it's not giving us the whole picture. And in not giving us the whole picture, then it's giving us a kind of lie. So I'm going to say that this movie has a morality, but it's a morality that only rises to the level of the sun. It's a naturalistic sort of morality that I'm not able to analyze all this, but I bet it can't even self-justify. This movie has no resources to say why empathy is a good thing, why self-sacrifice is a good thing, why it tends to bring about further good when you give yourself to empathy and self-sacrifice. So it's a partial good is the big evil thing that I see in this movie. And that's all I've got. So I'm going to just roll the ball over to you and ask you to take it away from here.
I think as far as what is false, the movie would have been excellent if it had argued that all humans, regardless of gender or race or location, are equally valuable. But this movie jumps from all humanity is equal to all religions are equal, and kind of associates the two together. I think it even implies that all religions worship the same God. As I said earlier, that religions are like a wagon wheel. God's in the middle, and it doesn't matter which religion, which spoke you go up, you always end up to the same God, whether it's Maheo, which is the Cheyenne Indians' God, so Yellowhawk's God. This surprised me from what I've read, that they were monotheistic. So Yellowhawk was monotheistic, and maybe, I wonder if I assume Cooper realized that when he's writing this story, and kind of, at least he's taking the monotheistic God, right? He's taking the single God religions and arguing that for pluralism. So I think that that's the idol here, is jumping from the value of humanity to taking that and applying it to religions.
And the name of Yellowhawk's God is Maheo. Am I getting that right?
I believe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's Maheo.
Okay, Maheo or Maheu. Okay, that's good. I had no idea about that. Can I push just a little bit there?
Yeah, sure.
I wonder if it's not saying all religions are are virtually equal in their ability to bring good or, whatever the participant is seeking from them. I kind of think this movie says, if anything, about religion, that they're all equally useless. Maheo in this movie doesn't protect Yellow Hawk from cancer or the white man. It doesn't, Maheo doesn't protect his daughters from being kidnapped and brutalized. It doesn't protect his family from being killed after his own death. Then you have that scene with Rosamund Pike's character and Christian Bale's character where it looks like Blocker is reading the Bible. And he may be, because he starts quoting scripture after that. But Pike's character is Rosalie Quaid, and Quaid asks Blocker, "Do you believe in God?" And Bale's Blocker responds, "I do, but he's been blind to the events in this part of the world for a long time." And then he kind of turns the question back to her, and she says that, yeah, she believes as well, but she believes because if she doesn't believe, the world looks even bleaker, which, I guess is sort of a bleak way of talking about the experiential value of religion, but it sounds like the secular idea of belief for belief's sake.
Well, I think she says that it's in those, she makes a statement that it's in these moments that I become closer to God, is what she said.
Oh.
Like she has to depend on him more.
Well, then that's wonderful. That's much better. I just completely blew that. If that's what she says about suffering, kudos to the screenwriter on this and Scott Cooper for putting it in his movie.
Oh yeah, I think this movie gets God's providence right. And I think that they do make those statements. And she makes a statement later on about, I don't know if we're going to be able to handle, she says God's providence, or I don't know if we can continue handling God's, or something along those lines. So I think it gets suffering right. And I think it gets God's providence right. I think it has a positive view of God. I just think that it basically argues like it's probably some of what you're saying as well concerning how all religions are valuable if they produce this common good.
Yeah. Well, certainly some of my stronger critiques there are kind of done away with her statement that you just cited.
Yeah, dude, this may be, and I'd be willing to guess, listener, this may be the most Christian movie you see that is produced in Hollywood this year. It may be it'll probably definitely be the most Christian rated R movie that's produced this year.
Oh, big statement. I'm gonna try to remember to check back with you as we go through what we hope to do in the coming year on that one. But you're just saying that for secularists who aren't making God's Not Dead Part 7 or whatever, which, by the way, side note, did you see that there's a sequel to The Passion of the Christ that's coming out?
I saw just the headline that it's going to be the biggest movie of all time. I wonder if Mel Gibson will buy another island.
Yeah, big in that way. Anyway, so it's not a movie that's explicitly trying to tell you something that Christians would affirm about reality, but it gets so much right that Christians agree with. Jared saying this is deeply Christian, even if it doesn't know it.
If Christian Bale had I said this to you after the movie, if Christian Bale had tried to evangelize Yellow Hawk, or if Rosalie had tried to evangelize Yellow Hawk, I think it would have been it would have been a movie where you could argue recommending it to all Christians. You need to go see this. If you watch The Passion of the Christ, as horrendously violent as it was, in graphic detail, this movie, there is so much redemption there. And I hated that part of it where Christian Bale kind of affirmed Yellow Hawk in his, I wish he'd evangelized him. I wish he had presented the Romans Road or something, man.
Did you know that God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life?
That's not the Romans Road.
I'm just thinking through the training that Blocker needed. He was busy hunting Indians. He wasn't showing up for Faith Night.
John 3:16 to him, man. That's not, anyway.
So I think you and I are both chomping at the bit to talk about what's good here. So are we ready to move on from what's evil?
Absolutely, man. Mm-hmm.
Okay, man. So I'm going to start here. Blocker is a deeply honorable man. This movie kind of scared me to death in the way that it opened up just in the opening sequence of events. It's terrifying. You see Native Americans terrorizing and murdering and devastating these homesteaders.
Mm-hmm.
For horses. Yeah, for horses. You then get, I think, a black title card. And on the other side of that that you see Captain Blocker, and he is bringing an Indian into custody, but right in front of him is what we assume to be this Indian's wife and child, and they are wailing at the treatment that this Indian is receiving from Blocker's men. And Blocker's men, I don't think they're trying to like play with him to torment him, but they're certainly trying to corral him the way you would a wild animal. So this guy's being tormented. And I thought, man, if this is just going to be another simplistic movie about how everybody's equally evil and we can't say either side's superior, even if I'm sympathetic to the idea that all men are equal in their fallenness, I just don't want to spend 2 hours watching a movie telling me, see, you're just as bad, basically. And I'm thankful this movie didn't do that. Now, I'm not saying this movie is super critical of Native Americans, but it shows a Blocker who does, in the name of war and following orders, does some really unneighborly things. And I know that's underselling it, but he does violence to people and families. But the more we get to know him throughout this movie, he is a man of deep honor. He responds to authority in a way that is honorable. He treats people who are his enemies and under his power pretty much honorably throughout the whole movie. He treats his friends honorably. He treats a woman who he pretty much holds in his power honorably. When others do not treat her honorably, he treats her with honor. Just by the time we get to the end of the movie, this man who was his mortal enemy in life, he is honorable in defending that man's dignity in death. And so I'm just thankful for the fact that they didn't go the easy route of saying, yeah, these white people are just like those Apache Raiders. You could tell a story like that and it would be realistic. It'd be grounded in historical truths, but it's good to have a guy that you can enjoy rooting for.
Oh yeah, I mean, I agree, man. He I don't know, it's convicting in how he basically serves her the whole time, right?
Yes, very compassionate and sensitive to her needs as she's mourning. So, I went there first. Let's just go back and forth. So, the honorableness of Blocker and his compatriots. Next thing you'd highlight that's good here in this movie.
It's along those lines, but I think the movie gets love, marriage. I think it gets sex right. It gets love right with families, in both the Blocker and his fellow soldiers. They have almost a familial relationship. They consider each one another brothers. And they're, like you were talking about, there's a lot of honor among those soldiers. They're best friends. I mean, they're just like brothers. And then Yellowhawk and his son and his daughter,
and then
daughter-in-law and grandson. There is a special bond there, and there is this movie, it's safe to say, I think, that there is a patriarchy on both, in both groups of the Native Americans and also the white Americans, I guess you could say. What is the politically correct term?
I think Yellowhawk called them white people, so we can do that. I mean, those are the contrasts. This is a Cowboys and Indians movie, or a Soldiers and Indians movie, and we can call them Indians and white people because that's the language of the movie.
Yeah. All right. So you see this familial love there, and from the beginning of the movie, the dad is willing to sacrifice his life for his family. So is the mother. So there it gets love right, I believe. This self-sacrificial emphasis on loving others.
You're talking about also Miss Quaid and her husband there in that opening scene where they try to protect their children, right?
Right. Yes. And then two, it gets love among friends right, concerning the soldiers willing to die for one another. The movie gets love, marriage, and sex right. You were talking about at one point Christian Bale's character. He gives up, so he was not expecting to run across Rosalie. Yeah. This lady whose family has been murdered, and he takes her into his camp, and so he doesn't have a tent for her, so he gives her his tent.
And he sleeps outside the door. Remember,
he sleeps outside for many nights. So one night it's raining cats and dogs, and she offers him. She says he can sleep in the tent with her, so he starts sleeping in the tent, and there's probably 2 feet between them every time it shows him. But then one night she puts her arm on him, and he turns over, and she puts her hand on his face, and they touch foreheads. They don't even kiss. We don't see them kiss any
in the entire movie. Yeah, and there's no fade to black where you're led to believe things went further from here. That
right.
That touch is a touch. I mean, that came after a particularly violent episode where yet another of Blocker's compatriots is killed, and that is just one human being comforting another in the most platonic way possible. I'm not here recommending that you go into a tent with an attractive member of the opposite sex and offer each other platonic comfort. That's not what I'm saying here. But for a movie that could have turned that into at best a fade to black sex scene, and it were something much more graphic. They just show two human beings comforting each other in the midst of really intense suffering.
And in most movies, it would have went into something awful. But I think there's an abstinence, there's a chivalry that is emphasized, and we assume that the movie ends with the two marrying and living happily ever after.
Yep, raising the orphan child of Yellowhawk's family, his grandson.
Yeah.
I appreciate everything about the way they show Blocker and his men responding to that character. There is so much compassion toward her. When she doesn't want them to dig the graves for her family because she'll do it herself, thank you very much, they stop digging and they let her do what she needs to do. And when she realizes that even the earth that has taken the blood of her family won't yield to her in her efforts to bury them, they then start digging the holes for her again. She just gets the freedom to mourn in a way that is so respectful and honoring of her, and that challenges me to be a better husband and father and pastor, because it's so attuned to be receptive to the needs of the people under his care. And this is a guy who is battle hardened, so it's really quite beautiful.
It is beautiful in such a way, because we have been, you can correct me, Jeff, on this, but we have been taught that, at least indirectly, that if you treat a woman the way that Christian Bale treats this woman in this movie, that it is demeaning, that it strips her of dignity, of value, all this baloney that we have shoved down our throats.
Strips her of agency. We're supposed to believe that if you, I don't want to get into white guys complaining, but I've had people, when I hold a door open for them, snap at me because I'm removing, we didn't get this far in the conversation, but just reading online interactions, I'm assuming they think I've removed agency from them. Like, I don't think they're capable of opening a door, or they need help opening such a heavy item. And there's none of that here. The thing that brings her back to actual agency is that she has space created for her by Blocker to heal and become an active participant in her own life again, after terror has just washed over her in a way that's left her completely knocked off her feet.
I mean, this movie, I think it gets complementarianism right. It gets chivalry right. To the chagrin of feminists today, Rosalie is not a weak woman. Although she is I would say, a complementarian woman, she is clearly distinct from men in this movie. But you wouldn't be able to call her I don't think anyone could watch this movie and think that she is a weak woman. She is a very strong woman, but in a very biblically feminine way.
Yeah, and as somebody who appreciates that, I think I could put on people who don't care for biblical femininity and appreciate her too as a strong character. One of my favorite scenes in that movie is at a really bleak point. Basically, there's a standoff with these landowners who want these Native Americans that Blocker's leading off their land. They don't care that he has a summons from the president to do this. It's just, we have more guns than you do, and we think we can gun you down before you can gun us down. And Miss Quaid is one of the characters who's standing there with a rifle pointed at the chest of the leader, and he looks over at her and says, "I don't think you have the spirit to pull that trigger." And you've just watched this woman attempt to bury her murdered family by clawing the dirt of the earth open to receive them. She has been through physical assault. She's the toughest woman this guy has ever laid eyes on, and she's the one who starts the shoot off. That guy it was such a good storytelling moment where that arrogant, uninformed son of a gun sitting on top of that horse bit off way more than he could chew by messing with her. She is such a strong character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even Captain Blocker and Yellowhawk, they are both against the killing of women and children. And Yellowhawk makes a statement about the Apache and basically says that they're evil because they don't discriminate between men and women. In other words, this movie advocates for treating women differently than men.
That's a good point, Jared. That's a really good point. And he's right. The movie makes it clear he's right. You're talking about positive patriarchal themes here.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a good thing. I mean, this movie provides a clear picture. See, society would have us to believe that that the woman in this movie is being demeaned and devalued, but the people who are devaluing her are the ones who are treating her like a man, right? The ones who are willing to kill her, the ones who are willing to shoot her, the ones who are willing to the ones who are valuing her are the ones who are treating her different than they treat the men.
Yeah, on the same deal, which, by the way, we've talked about how good Christian Bale was and Rosamund Pike. Yellowhawk is played by Wes Studi, and man, he's incredible. And now I've read these criticisms online that he's playing the Indian stereotype of the sage and stoic Indian. I guess some of that's going on, man, but this is not a flint-faced Indian standing apart in some kind of mystical wisdom. Another one of my favorite parts of the movie, it's also right on the cusp of some really dark stuff. The women of the group have been kidnapped. We're led to believe that they have been sexually violated. They've been tied up outside of this fur traders camp. And not that long ago, Bale's character, Blocker, was only relating to Yellowhawk as an enemy and a butcher. He's just recently had his shackles removed. And when they come to the point where they're looking down on the fur trader camp and they're deciding the strategy to go liberate these women, Block's giving some orders. And Yellowhawk says, basically, that's my daughter, so I'm the one leading the assault on us. And so Blocker kind of responds to that. And he, doing that, responding to Yellowhawk there, he kind of acknowledges the justice of letting the man who should be protecting these women just go and do that the way he should, even if it didn't square with the social dynamics of the situation of a soldier transporting a prisoner.
Right, and that shows kind of the softening of his heart too, because earlier, like a couple days earlier, one of his soldiers had let Yellowhawk and his son sneak out to kill the Apache,
who had killed Quaid's family and then also assaulted the Blocker party as they were moving to Yellowhawk's homeland.
And Blocker, Christian Bale, had threatened his soldier not to, basically said, don't let it happen again or I'll hang you from a tree. And then here a few days later, his heart has softened. He is seeing the Indians no longer as things or as objects to be conquered or even as prisoners, but as equal men. Yeah. So there really is a humanizing factor. And not to mention that it is white men that they come against. White men, fur traders, but white men had stolen, had kidnapped Yellowhawk's daughter and daughter-in-law, and had also kidnapped Rosalie, which would be Christian Bale's. I think by that point, he's kind of falling for her.
Sure, she's certainly under his care.
Oh yeah. So he definitely feels responsibility there, and so I think that scene is kind of a glimpse of what's to come, and kind of sets up. You and I knew how that end scene was going. We knew how the end was going to be once that guy was telling them to get off their land, right?
Yeah.
We knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, you've pushed this good man too far, and he's now going to side with his mortal enemies over and against the people that his commission tells him to protect, because they are in the these people that he was otherwise supposed to protect are now standing in an immoral ground against the people who had the moral high ground, and he sides with the moral high ground in defending the Indian community. I guess, Jared, we're well into this thing, so I'm going to transition us into how does the gospel apply, and I'm going to set you up on this a little bit. I think one of the ways the gospel clearly applies here is the transformative power of showing grace to others. We've already mentioned that when Miss Quaid sees Yellowhawk's family for the first time, she freaks out because it's more Indians, the same skin color as the people who destroyed her family just hours or days ago. But eventually one of them reaches out and offers her clean clothes and says, I would be honored if you'd wear this. So she gets a chance to get out of the garments that still have the blood of her family on them. And then she responds eventually by returning those clothes to the woman after she's got some Western dress at a fort or something. And in the exchange of giving the dress back, she learns the name of the Indian woman who provided for her in her suffering. And then you see eventually they're all sitting around together, a particular camp fire right in front of Yellowhawk's tent, and she is part of the group that observes the little grandson offering a sweet gift to his grandfather. She identifies herself with the Indian party and goes to help them clean up rather than making them do all the work. And basically you start to see the bonds of community emerging first with her character in the Indian community, and they do a really good job with the scenery of the movie, not in terms of like the natural world, but often you'll see Rosalie's character sitting with the Indians, and you can can tell, like they're starting to care for one another. And Blocker is standing over and away from them with his eyes on the horizon. He's not part of that community. He's only there as the protector and the sentry. But over time, in situations like the one we just talked about, where they go to rescue the women together, and where he sees that this community, Yellowhawk's community, has a desire to stand up against evildoers as well. And, that his own brutality is mirrored in Yellowhawk's brutality, both acting in the best interests of their people as they understood in the moment. Eventually, by the time Yellowhawk comes to the end of his life, he comes over to him and says, I think he calls him a friend, right? And he tells him to basically to die well.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, he names off the people, I believe, who Yellowhawk had killed.
Who were his friends.
Yeah. His friends who he had killed. But then Yellowhawk, I can't remember what Yellowhawk says to him, but he says, we've both lost many friends.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that kind of softens Bale's heart a little bit, where he understands that I've done evil as well. And so he initiates reconciliation there.
Absolutely. And I think really, the mechanism for Rosalie to connect with Yellowhawk's family is showing grace to one another. The way that Blocker is brought into that isn't by showing grace initially, it's that he gives himself to protect them. Even if he can't stand Yellowhawk and his family, he is under obligation to provide for them and to keep them safe and to see them through their journey. And in doing that over and over, he eventually comes to see them as human beings like himself. And so there's a drawing mechanism of showing grace to one another, but then there's also a drawing mechanism of caring for someone even when you don't want to. And what that leaves us with at the end of the movie is a family that's made from the three representative groups here. You've got Blocker as the father, you've got the widow who we met part of the way into the journey, and then you've got the grandson from the Indian community. They are now a new family, united by compassion and self-sacrifice. That looks a lot like the gospel.
Oh yeah, that looks like a whole lot like the gospel, doesn't it? But as far as how does the gospel apply, there is an emphasis on pluralism. And so how do we answer how do we answer pluralism? We show it for what it is. See, the reason why people argue in favor of pluralism is because they believe it's the most humble argument, that basically there's truth in all religions, and so they think that it's valuing all religions equally. But if you were to tell Jesus Christ when he's walking on earth, and he says in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. And a pluralist would have to tell him that he's wrong. So in other words, pluralism is saying that they respect all religions, but the truth is that they only respect what they pick and choose from those religions to respect. In other words, pluralism disrespects all religions except its own.
Well said.
And so it's this veiled arrogance is what it is. That's what pluralism is. Now, that's not how it's portrayed. Pluralists would tell you they do not believe in exclusivism, meaning like us saying that Jesus Christ is the only way to God the Father. If you try to go any other religion except through Jesus Christ, you're not getting to God the Father. They would say that we're wrong, and that's exclusivism. Well, pluralism, in them saying that there is truth in all religions, and them being willing to call us wrong, is still a form of exclusivism. They're saying that only their way is right. And so, in my opinion, pluralism does not truly respect all religions equally. It actually disrespects all religions. I mean, it disrespects especially the authors of these various religions. I mean, you can't look at a Muslim and tell them that they worship the same God that we do. I mean, they would tell you you're crazy. Christianity is a triune God, and we believe that Jesus Christ is God the Son incarnate. They argue that Jesus was a good prophet, but he wasn't God's son. And so those two things are mutually exclusive. Pluralism does not respect the claims of the prophets or of Jesus or of God, the triune God. Christianity, for example, emphasizes exclusivity. And so, the Bible, not only does Jesus say he's the way, the truth, and the life, the author of Hebrews says Jesus is the only mediator of the new covenant. He's the only high priest. He's the only God-man who lived the life God required of us, but then died the death that we deserve. deserve. And he's the only one who's risen from the dead to conquer death. I mean, the list goes on and on and on concerning who Jesus is and who the Bible says he is. And so when you see emphasis on pluralism, lovingly encourage folks who argue this, point out these things so that you can show them that what they're arguing, it really is not respecting the various religions. It's disrespecting. And there's one more thing I want to say about the church, Jeff. As I was watching this movie and as I've been thinking on it, that family at the end of the movie, what's so sad is that largely does not look like the church in America today. As far as racial reconciliation and we still have black churches, white churches, Hispanic churches, and that should not be the case. Now, churches need to reflect the races that are in their community, but there should not be bodies of worship. There should not be Christian groups that gather together around their race. Man, heaven's not going to be like that. Heaven's going to be all races, all tribes and tongues, arm in arm, bowing before a Jew who is God the Son incarnate. It makes no sense for us to be segregated like we are today. And that's kind of one rebuke, I think, of this movie, at least to the church as Christians watch it.
Yeah, I think, that would be my final word on the movie. This movie really wants the church, kind of like Get Out wants the church. Mm-hmm. You're right that it, in some ways, pictures the church better than the church in our own age and cultural moment does. But nonetheless, Christians own the home territory on the idea that self-sacrifice and showing grace to others brings you into community and takes you from a dehumanized, monster, I guess, would be an appropriate way to describe Blocker at the beginning, who has done these violent, evil things to people that he was tasked with hunting down, and makes you a human, makes you into a part of the community, draws you into that community, and even reshapes you into a father, or whatever your particular gendered expression of caring for others in an authoritative sense is. You're a father, you're a mother, under the great Father of us all. And so this is a movie that I think kind of puts in front of us the way the culture, even in its most secular thinking, is really looking for the new humanity known as the church that has the power to transform us, again, through the redeeming power of grace and self-sacrifice that Christ performed on our behalf.
Amen. Amen.
Jared, anything else you want to say on this one, man?
No, brother, I think that's it. I want to encourage listeners, if you haven't seen this movie, to go see it. Be aware of the caveats we've said, but I think it's worth seeing. I'll see it again.
Yeah, me too. It may be one I buy. I buy a lot of Western movies, and so it might be a purchase for me. So, Jared, where can for those who admire your insight on this episode, where can they find more of your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Jared H. Moore. You can find me on Facebook at All Truth is God's Truth. I have another podcast called All Truth is God's Truth. You can find that on various platforms. And actually, Jeff and I are launching probably this week, by the time this episode drops, or at least the week that this episode drops, you'll be able to find us on Patheos. We have a new blog coming on Patheos called Pop Culture Coram Deo. We've already got like 6 articles written that we're ready to drop there, so check it out.
Yeah, we will put up links to that on our social media, which is basically everywhere at PCCD Pod. So that's our Twitter handle. That's the quick link for our Facebook page. That is the link for our subreddit on reddit.com. That's the username that we go by, or the handle we go by on Instagram. We'll put up links to that new blog, all those places to help you find it. And if you're looking for me online, I'd love to connect with you. It's at RightJeff on most social media platforms. I'd love to hear from you. Just want to put another appeal out. We told you we're getting a few reviews trickling in that we're deeply thankful for, but really we need as many of those as we can get. And so I'm specifically asking you as our listener, if you're listening to this either on an Apple phone or you're sitting near a computer, if you'll pull up iTunes or go into Apple Podcasts and leave us a review, we would so appreciate that. Now, we love 5-star reviews, and we would really appreciate those, but basically any review you want to give us, we're going to be thankful, and we will read them and hear your feedback and check those things out. So we really do covet those reviews and appreciate those of you who make choice to leave them. Anything else from you, Jared Moore?
That's it. Thank you, folks, for listening.
Yeah, we will talk to you guys very soon. I think we're looking at doing Guardians of the Galaxy next, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 next. Mm-hmm. So you guys can get ready for that by rewatching that movie if that's something your conscience allows, or just be ready to meet with us again when the next episode drops. Either way, thanks for listening to this episode of Pop Culture Coram Deo, and we will talk to you soon.